Good afternoon and welcome to my channel. My name is Dr. Carmen McGuinness, and today I'm going to be talking about primary and secondary emotions and how to identify each. Managing emotions is a big topic, so I will be doing future videos to complement this one. When we experience an emotion, the first response is often a bodily one. With any emotion, our heart rate might rise. If we feel threatened or stressed, cortisol might be released. Often with pleasant emotions, we get what we call butterflies. In the West, we're taught to hide our emotional responses and sometimes to deny the emotion entirely, whereas Eastern societies are taught to detach from their emotions and view them as outside of themselves. Neither response helps us understand and deal with our emotions. And only recently have we begun to think of emotions as being adaptive, something we do need to explore. Emotions can be thought of as a signaling system. They signal the person experiencing them to important changes in the environment being the places we are, the people we're with, and the things that are happening around us. They tell us to engage our body and mind to prepare to behave in particular ways. And they signal others as to how we're feeling as well. So here's how the internal signaling works. When we feel fear, the fight, fright, or freeze response, that fight, flight, or freeze response kicks in. When we feel joy, we might smile. When we feel regret or shame, we might apologize or attempt to correct our actions, hopefully. If we feel hurt, we might cry or seek solace. These are just a few examples of how emotions tell us what we need to do next. As I mentioned, we also signal others through emotions, and emotions are therefore very important to relationships of all sorts. One example, if we see the emotion, we read the emotion on the face of our partner, and then we have an emotional response to it, which we then also read. These are two parts of a process, and both parts participate in helping us understand our partner's primary meaning, and they inform us as to how we should respond. In this way, emotional communication is very much teamwork. In research conducted by Porges and colleagues, the face-to-heart connection is highlighted. This is referred to as the polyvagal system. And it's through the polyvagal system that the facial expressions of others affect our heart rate and our heart rate variability. And indeed, our own facial expressions affect us as well. For instance, when we smile, we release oxytocin, the love hormone. So simply smiling can cheer you up. Higher level conceptual processes, such as reflection, also participate in emotional intelligence. About reflection, the philosopher Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." Well, we might adjust this today to say, "I think about how I feel, and therefore I am." And we might add, "and I know how I am." And there's also a meta version of reflection as well, when we ask ourselves, are my emotions healthy? Are they adaptive? Or am I stuck in an old pattern that no longer works for me? Those who are injured, have experienced some sort of trauma, and have a maladaptive response frequently need to relearn how to read the facial expressions of others. Obviously, this depends upon the degree of trauma, but many people who have experienced trauma in life lose the ability to successfully read the facial expressions of others. They interject the trauma situation into reading facial expressions. So this skill needs to be relearned. And those who experience trauma at a very early age, an age before which we would have learned to read facial expressions, are often learning this skill for the very first time. And it's important, too, to understand that trauma may not have been overt. Even the slightest neglect from a well-meaning parent, even a very well-meaning parent who's distracted by life, can be traumatic to a young child. Awareness and acceptance of emotions are the first things a therapist might ask a client to agree upon in therapy. First, we learn to tolerate our emotions, and then we learn to self-regulate them. A common regulation activity is to name what you're feeling. Give the emotion a label, and you've packaged it, so to speak. In general, language is a good way to regulate one's emotions, whether it's verbal language or journaling. Sometimes self-regulation includes others. An example of this is a sudden drop in altitude during a flight. You feel fear, of course, you've just dropped a couple of 100 feet, and you look at the flight attendant to see if she's carrying on as usual or looking a little freaked out. This is one reason, this sort of touching base with others, is one reason why having a stable support system is so important to us. Just imagine what it would be like if the flight attendant overreacted in that situation. And sometimes friends do. So far I've talked about primary emotions. There are also secondary emotions. For instance, when we're feeling hurt, we often might feel right afterwards anger. Hurt is the primary emotion and anger is the secondary emotion. And there's a sex difference in how secondary emotions occur, or which secondary emotion occurs, I should correct. Men tend to express anger as a secondary emotion to hurt, fear, or shame, whereas women tend to express sadness or hurt when in fact they're feeling angry. So we see anger is a very tricky emotion to figure out, and we should be very cautious around it. Another kind of secondary emotion is the feelings we have about our feelings. For example, someone might feel ashamed of their sexual excitement in certain situations, or afraid of their anger. Yet another is one's thinking about it for too long. For instance, if I'm thinking of telling a nice gentleman how I feel about him, but I think he'll reject me, I feel anxious about telling him. So this thought process that's interjected in the secondary emotion affects the secondary emotion. A question for the therapy session is, why am I thinking he'll reject me? Is this based on a fundamental feeling of insecurity? And if so, it should be explored therapeutically. Instrumental emotion is yet another form of secondary emotions. This is when we build up an emotion to use it on another in order to get something. Sometimes we feel two primary emotions. For instance, when left by a lover, we might feel both sadness and anger. All of the above are real. However, we might think of primary as being more basic and secondary as more complex. Another reason it's important to get to the heart of the primary emotion is that when we focus on the secondary emotion, we can devalue the primary emotion. If I'm angry all the time about my lover breaking it off between us, then I'm never really going to get to the sadness that's underlying that and whatever's driving that sadness. Another example is when dealing with a child. If the primary emotion is hurt feelings and the secondary emotion is rage, and we focus on the rage, which of course we have to focus on that at some point, and we tell the child that rage is bad, he needs to control that, etc., we devalue the hurt that he's experiencing. And instead of dealing with it and talking about that, we teach him an adaptive way, and teaching him an adaptive way to manage it, we teach him instead that hurt is shameful. and that he should hide it. And even as adults, when we dialogue on the primary emotional level, we communicate more authentically. We're really talking to each other and not what came up after we talked. I hope this has been helpful. As always, I can be contacted through the About tab. And if you did find this helpful and informative, please give me a like. Thank you very much.